music wasn't supposed to stop that night. Not in Las Vegas. Not in the middle of an Elvis Presley concert. And certainly not because of one elderly woman carrying nothing more than an old photograph. Yet, decades later, the people who filled that showroom would struggle to remember which songs Elvis had performed. They would remember only the silence that arrived after Elvis looked into the crowd and recognized a face he had prayed he would see again. Las Vegas, 1972. The International Hotel glittered like a palace built from gold. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above thousands of guests dressed in black tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. Waiters slipped quietly between tables carrying silver trays, while photographers searched for the perfect angle of the biggest entertainer alive. Outside, hundreds more fans pressed against the entrance, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the man the world called the King. Inside, the lights suddenly disappeared. Darkness swallowed the room. A heartbeat echoed through the speakers. Boom, boom, boom. Then, a single spotlight burst through the darkness. Elvis Presley stepped into it. The audience erupted. The sound was almost violent. People screamed until their voices disappeared. Women cried. Men climbed to their feet. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning across the ballroom. For a few breathtaking moments, it felt as though the building itself was shaking beneath the weight of thousands of cheering souls. Elvis smiled. Not the smile printed on magazine covers. Not the smile seen on television. This one was real, warm, grateful, almost boyish. Even after years of sold-out arenas and worldwide fame, there was still something inside him that remembered the frightened young singer from Memphis who had once wondered if anyone would ever clap for him. He adjusted the jeweled microphone. The orchestra came alive. Strings, piano, brass. Then his unmistakable voice floated through the room like velvet. Every note wrapped itself around the audience. Some closed their eyes. Others reached toward the stage as if touching him might somehow freeze the moment forever. Time disappeared. Only the music remained, song after song. The applause grew louder. The energy became electric. No one wanted the night to end, not even Elvis. He laughed with the musicians, pointed toward fans in the front rows, accepted scarves and flowers tossed onto the stage. It looked like another unforgettable performance, until something changed. At first, it was almost impossible to notice. Near the center aisle, an elderly woman slowly stood from her seat. She wasn't dressed like everyone else. Her coat had faded with time. Her shoes were worn. The small purse hanging from her shoulder looked older than many people in the audience. She didn't wave. She didn't shout Elvis's name. She simply began walking toward the stage. One slow step, then another. Security noticed immediately. 2 guards exchanged glances. A third touched the radio clipped beneath his jacket. Within seconds, they were moving, fast, professional, silent. Most of the audience remained focused on Elvis. No one realized what was happening. The orchestra played on. The spotlight followed Elvis across the stage. Then, he looked down, only for a second, just one glance. His smile vanished. The lyrics caught inside his throat. His feet stopped moving. The microphone lowered an inch. The band continued without him. The pianist looked over in confusion. The drummer hesitated. The guitarist frowned. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Elvis wasn't looking at the audience anymore. He was staring at one person, the elderly woman. She kept walking. Her eyes never left his. Neither of them blinked. It was as if the thousands of people surrounding them had suddenly ceased to exist. One security guard reached her first.
"Ma'am, you'll have to." "No."
The word echoed across the silent room. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everyone recognized the voice. Elvis slowly raised his hand. His eyes never left the woman. "No one touches her." The guards froze. The orchestra stopped. The final piano note faded into absolute silence. You could hear someone inhale. You could hear a wine glass gently touch a table. You could hear the air conditioning humming beneath the ceiling. More than 2,000 people, completely silent. No one understood. Reporters leaned forward. Photographers lowered their cameras instead of taking pictures. Even those sitting in the last row could feel something impossible was unfolding. The woman finally reached the edge of the stage. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elvis looked as though he had forgotten where he was. The bright lights reflected in his eyes, but they weren't seeing Las Vegas anymore. They were seeing somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Somewhere long buried beneath fame. The woman slowly slipped her trembling hand into the pocket of her coat. Security instinctively stepped forward again. Elvis gently shook his head. She wasn't carrying danger. She was carrying history. Carefully, almost reverently, she pulled out a small black and white photograph. Its edges had turned yellow. The paper had been folded so many times that tiny cracks crossed the image like delicate scars. She held it with both hands, as though it were the most precious treasure she had ever owned. Without speaking, she offered it to Elvis. He accepted it carefully. The moment his eyes met the photograph, everything inside him broke. His fingers began to tremble. His breathing became uneven. The color drained from his face. A tear escaped before he could stop it. Not one, then another. The audience stared in disbelief. They had seen Elvis laugh. They had seen him dance. They had seen him command stadiums with effortless confidence. But no one, not a single person, had ever seen him cry like this. His thumb gently brushed across the faded picture. There, frozen forever in black and white, stood a skinny young man wearing a cheap jacket that didn't quite fit. His hair was messy, his smile uncertain, his dreams impossibly large. Beside him stood a teenage girl, whose eyes sparkled brighter than any stage light. Behind them, a tiny music club in Memphis. No fame, no fortune, no screaming crowds. Just two young dreamers who believed tomorrow could be kinder than today. Elvis closed his eyes. A memory he had locked away for 18 long years burst open all at once. He could almost smell the rain. He could hear traffic splashing through wet streets. He could feel the cold Memphis wind against his face. And suddenly, Las Vegas disappeared. The roaring crowd disappeared. The golden lights disappeared. He wasn't standing before thousands anymore. He was once again a young man with empty pockets, walking out of a tiny club, moments away from meeting a crying girl who would unknowingly place a promise inside his heart. A promise that even fame, even time, could never erase. For a long moment, Elvis didn't move. The photograph remained in his trembling hands as though it weighed more than the world itself. No one in the showroom understood what they were witnessing. To them, it was only an old picture. To Elvis, it was the doorway back to a life he had buried beneath fame. His breathing slowed. The bright lights faded from his eyes. The orchestra, the audience, the cameras, everything around him dissolved into memory. Only the rain remained. Memphis, 18 years earlier, long before the world knew his name. The streets were soaked from an evening storm. Rainwater flowed along broken sidewalks, carrying cigarette butts and fallen leaves into the drains. Neon signs flickered weakly above tiny music clubs, where hopeful singers performed for a handful of strangers and a few coins. Elvis stepped outside through the back door of one of those clubs. His shirt clung to his skin. His hair was damp with sweat. His pocket held only a few wrinkled dollar bills, the entire payment for the night's performance. It wasn't enough, not even close. His family still struggled to pay bills. Some days his dreams felt larger than his future. He looked toward the empty street. The rain had almost stopped. Then he heard someone crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet sound of someone trying very hard not to let the world hear them. He followed the sound. Near the old brick wall beside the club sat a young girl hugging her knees. Her shoes were worn through. Her coat was far too thin for the cold. Beside her rested a small dance bag with a broken zipper. She quickly wiped away her tears when she noticed him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bother anyone." Elvis crouched beside her. "You aren't bothering me." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Rain dripped from the roof above. Cars rolled past in the distance. Finally, Elvis smiled gently.
"What's your name?" she told him. "And yours?"
He laughed softly. "I'm just Elvis. Not Elvis Presley, not the king. Just Elvis." She stared at him for a moment before speaking again. "You sing beautifully." He looked down, embarrassed. "Thank you. My father says you sing like someone who already belongs on a big stage." Elvis chuckled. "I hope your father is right." The girl's smile faded almost instantly. "He won't ever see it." Elvis looked at her. "What do you mean?" She lowered her eyes. "My father is very sick." Silence. "The doctors say he needs medicine we can't afford." Her voice cracked. "So," she looked toward the little dance bag, "I quit dancing." "You quit?" She nodded. "I had to. It costs too much. My shoes are falling apart. My lessons stopped months ago. My father kept apologizing." "He cried when he told me." She swallowed hard. "So I told him I didn't want to dance anymore." "But that wasn't true." A tear rolled down her cheek. "It was the only thing I ever wanted." Elvis stared at the old dance shoes sticking out of her bag. The soles had nearly separated. One ribbon had been stitched together several times by hand. Someone had tried very hard to keep them alive, just like the dream they represented. He looked back at her. "Show me." She blinked. "What?" "Dance." She laughed through her tears. "I can't." "Why not?" "There isn't any music." Elvis smiled. "There doesn't have to be." Before she could answer, he quietly began humming. No microphone, no audience, no spotlight. Just one young man humming beneath the Memphis rain. At first she hesitated. Then she stood. Her shoes scraped softly against the wet pavement. She closed her eyes, and she danced. Slowly, carefully, as though every movement carried years of hope. She wasn't perfect. She missed steps. She nearly slipped once.
But none of that mattered, because every movement came from her heart. Elvis stopped humming, not because he wanted to,
because he forgot. He simply watched. By the time she finished, he realized something. The world might never know her name, but if dreams had a face, it looked exactly like hers. She lowered her head.
"I'm sorry."
"I've gotten rusty." Elvis shook his head.
"No."
"You reminded me why people should never stop chasing what they love."
She smiled sadly. "Sometimes life decides for you."
"No," he answered quietly. "Sometimes life only delays you."
She looked at him with uncertain eyes. "You really believe that?" He nodded without hesitation.
"I have to.
If I stop believing,
I'll never leave Memphis."
Those words hung in the cold night air. For the first time, they both laughed. The rain finally stopped. Clouds drifted apart. Moonlight spilled across the empty street. The girl reached into her dance bag. "I have something."
"It's not worth much."
She carefully removed a tiny silver medal attached to a faded blue ribbon.
"It belonged to my grandfather. He always said it brought courage."
She held it toward Elvis. "I want you to have it." He stepped back.
"I can't take that."
"You should keep it," she smiled. "I've already lost my dream."
"Maybe this can help yours."
Elvis looked at the little medal. It wasn't made of gold. It wasn't expensive. The ribbon was beginning to fray. Yet, somehow, it felt priceless. He accepted it with both hands. "I'll carry it." She laughed softly. "You don't have to."
"I want to."
Then he reached into his jacket. The only thing he could offer was a small black and white photograph taken outside the club earlier that week. On the back, he borrowed a pen from the club owner and slowly wrote, "Dreams don't disappear. They wait for the people brave enough to return." Then he signed his name. Not because he believed it would ever become valuable, but because he wanted her to remember one thing. Someone believed in her.
She held the photograph against her chest.
"I'll never lose this."
Elvis smiled. "Good." Then, without thinking, without planning, without realizing that those few words would one day stop an entire concert, he stretched out his hand. "When the whole world knows my name." She laughed.
"The whole world?"
He grinned. "Why not?" She shook her head, smiling through tears.
"All right."
He continued. "When that day comes, I'm going to invite you onto the biggest stage I can find. You'll dance, and everyone will finally see what I saw tonight." She looked at him as though he had just promised the impossible. "You'll forget."
"I won't."
"People always forget."
"I won't."
"You'll become famous."
"I won't forget."
"You'll meet important people."
"I won't forget."
"You'll travel everywhere."
"I still won't forget."
She searched his face one last time. There wasn't even the smallest trace of doubt, only sincerity, only hope. Slowly, she placed her hand into his. "Then I believe you." They shook hands beneath the quiet Memphis sky. Neither of them knew that life was about to carry them in opposite directions. One would become the most famous entertainer on earth. The other would spend years caring for a sick father, sacrificing every dream she had ever held. Time would steal youth. It would steal opportunities. It would steal almost everything. But it would never steal that promise. Back in Las Vegas, the memory vanished. Elvis opened his eyes. The faded photograph was still resting in his hands. The elderly woman stood before him exactly where memory had left her. Only now, the hopeful girl from Memphis had silver hair. The dance shoes were gone. The years had written themselves across her face. But when she looked at him, he saw the very same eyes, the same quiet hope, the same unwavering faith. A tear rolled down Elvis's cheek. He finally found the strength to whisper the words he had carried inside his heart for almost 2 decades. I know who you are, and I know exactly what I promised you. The elderly woman smiled through tears. So do I. The entire showroom remained frozen. No applause, no whispers, only thousands of people holding their breath, waiting to discover why the greatest entertainer in the world was crying over a promise made by a young dreamer in the rain. No one moved. Not the orchestra, not the photographers, not the security guards. More than 2,000 people sat in complete silence, their eyes fixed on the stage. No one knew what the photograph meant. No one knew why the greatest performer in the world stood there with tears running down his face. They only knew they were witnessing something no ticket could ever buy. Elvis slowly lifted his eyes. For a long moment, he simply looked at the woman standing before him. 18 years. 18 years had carved lines across her face, turned the dark hair he remembered into silver, and stolen the lightness from her steps. But they had never stolen her smile. It was still there, gentle, patient, hopeful. The very same smile he had seen beneath the rain in Memphis. His voice finally returned. Barely above a whisper, he asked, "Did you keep it all these years?" The woman looked down at the photograph resting in his hands. "I carried it everywhere." She smiled through tears. "When my father passed away, it was in my pocket. When I lost our home, it was still with me. When I worked 2 jobs just to survive, it stayed close to my heart." She placed one hand over her chest. "There were nights I had nothing. No money, no future, no reason to believe tomorrow would be better." She paused. "But every time I wanted to give up, I read what you wrote." Elvis looked down at the faded handwriting on the back of the photograph. "Dreams don't disappear. They wait for the people brave enough to return." His own words, written by a young man who had almost nothing. Words he had nearly forgotten. Words that had become someone else's reason to keep living. He closed his eyes. Fame had given him everything. But in that moment, he realized something far greater. Sometimes the smallest kindness becomes the biggest miracle in another person's life. The woman continued softly. "My father never recovered. He passed away only a few months after we met. I wanted to write to you. I tried. But by then, you were already becoming famous. I saw your name everywhere. Radio, television, newspapers. I told myself, he's living the dream. I couldn't interrupt that. So I simply watched." She laughed quietly through tears. "Every concert, every movie, every interview. I wondered if somewhere you still remembered."
Elvis covered his face for a moment. I remembered. His voice cracked. Not every day, not every month, but before every important concert. He slowly reached into the inside pocket of his white jumpsuit. The audience leaned forward. Very carefully, he removed a tiny velvet pouch. It looked old, much older than the suit he was wearing. He untied the faded string. Then he poured something into the palm of his hand, a small silver medal. The ribbon had faded with age.
The metal had lost its shine. Yet it had been polished enough to show it had been touched countless times. Gasps spread across the showroom. The woman covered her mouth.
You still have it.
Elvis nodded. I never performed without it. He smiled through tears. Every big concert. Every recording session. Every time I thought I wasn't strong enough, I held this. He looked down at the medal. I told myself, one day I'll find her. One day I'll keep my promise. He looked back into her eyes, but every year that passed, I believed I had failed. The woman gently shook her head. No, you didn't. You gave me hope, and hope kept me alive. Silence returned. Not an empty silence, a sacred one. Even the musicians were wiping away tears. Some of the security guards quietly lowered their heads. Several photographers had forgotten to take pictures. For once, no one wanted to interrupt the moment. Elvis turned toward the orchestra. His voice was calm. Play something soft. No announcement, no grand speech. Just those 3 words. The conductor slowly raised his hands. A lone piano began to play. Then the strings joined in. The melody was delicate, gentle enough to sound like a memory. Elvis stepped down from the stage. Instead of asking the woman to climb toward him, he walked to her. The audience watched in complete silence. He stopped in front of her. Then, like the young man from Memphis all those years ago, he extended his hand. This time, I'm not late. Fresh tears filled her eyes. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his. The applause that usually shook the building never came. No one wanted to break the silence. Slowly, Elvis led her onto the stage. The bright lights no longer felt blinding. They felt warm, almost gentle. He guided her to the center, the very place where moments earlier he had stood alone before thousands. Now, he stood beside the person to whom that stage had belonged for 18 long years. The music continued. Quiet. Beautiful. Without speaking, they began to dance. Not with perfect choreography. Not with rehearsed elegance. Just 2 old friends moving carefully beneath the lights. One carried the weight of worldwide fame. The other carried the weight of a lifetime spent waiting. Neither mattered anymore. Every slow step honored a promise. Every turn erased another year of separation. People throughout the showroom began crying openly. Women reached for handkerchiefs. Men quietly wiped away tears. Some held the hands of the people beside them. Others simply watched, unable to look away. The orchestra played more softly still. The only sound louder than the music was the quiet sobbing scattered throughout the room. When the dance finally ended, neither of them let go. Elvis lifted the microphone one last time. His voice was barely steady enough to speak. People have called me many things. A singer, an actor, a star. He looked toward the woman beside him. But tonight, I'm simply a man who almost forgot the most important promise he ever made. He paused. I've received awards. I've sold records. I've performed before kings and presidents. But none of that means anything if your word means nothing. He gently raised the woman's hand into the air. This lady waited 18 years without asking for anything. She never demanded an explanation. She never blamed me. She simply believed. He smiled. And faith like that deserves this stage far more than I do. He stepped backward. The spotlight followed him. He looked toward the lighting booth, then quietly shook his head. The technician understood. A heartbeat later, the spotlight moved away from Elvis and settled entirely upon the woman. She froze. Her eyes widened. For the first time in her life, she stood alone beneath the brightest light in the room, exactly as he had promised. The audience slowly rose to its feet, not because anyone asked them to, because their hearts told them to. No cheering, no shouting, only silence. Thousands of people standing together with tears in their eyes. Sometimes, silence is louder than applause. The woman looked around the room in disbelief, then back at Elvis. You remembered. He smiled. I was late. But I remembered. She embraced him. The audience could no longer hold back. The room erupted, not with the excitement of a concert, but with the gratitude of people who had just witnessed something infinitely more valuable than entertainment. They had witnessed integrity. They had witnessed loyalty. They had witnessed a promise surviving longer than fame itself. The next morning, newspapers across America printed photographs from the concert. Many readers expected headlines about another sold-out performance, another hit song, another record-breaking night. Instead, the front pages spoke of an old photograph, a worn silver medal, and a promise made by two young dreamers beneath the rain in Memphis. Years later, people would disagree about which performance had been Elvis Presley's greatest. Some would choose the biggest concerts. Others would choose the biggest songs. But those who had been inside that showroom on that unforgettable night always gave the same answer. It wasn't a song. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even a concert. It was the moment a man proved that fame may make someone unforgettable, but only keeping your word can make someone truly legendary. And perhaps that is the most beautiful music a human heart will ever hear.